walked into their daughter's college graduation with another woman on his arm, and he was smiling. Not the careful, contained smile of a man who understood the weight of what he was doing. The open, easy smile of a man who had already decided that this moment belonged to him and that the woman standing 30 feet away in a pale gray dress, the one who had spent 22 years making sure this day would happen, had no power left to take it from him. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about most things for a very long time. Her name was Miriam Castillo. She was 41 years old. She had spent the past decade working 3 days a week as a grants coordinator at a nonprofit arts organization in Portland, driving a 7-year-old Subaru and wearing the same rotation of unremarkable blazers to a job that paid her $58,000 a year and suited her, in every visible way, perfectly. She packed her own lunch. She brought coffee from home in a scratched travel mug with a faded Portland Half Marathon sticker on the side. She sat in the same chair at the same desk and reviewed grant applications with the kind of patient, systematic attention that her colleagues found admirable and her husband had long since stopped noticing. What her husband did not know, what his attorney did not know, what the woman he had brought to their daughter's graduation in a fitted coral dress did not know, was that Miriam Castillo held a 68% controlling interest in a portfolio of commercial real estate assets worth approximately $240 million. Her grandfather had built it. Her mother had maintained it. And for 19 years of marriage, Miriam had kept it the way her family had always kept it. Invisible, structured, sealed inside a network of holding entities so deliberately unremarkable that a forensic accountant would need reeks to identify the beneficial owner. The trap had already been set. The door had already closed. Marcus just hadn't heard it yet. Her grandfather, Robert Castillo, had come to the United States from Monterey with $40 and a mechanical aptitude that he applied first to auto repair, then to property management, then to commercial development across 3 western states. He was a man who wore the same watch for 30 years and drove domestic vehicles and believed, with the conviction of someone who had seen what happened when money became visible, that the moment you let the world know what you had, you lost control of who came for it. He passed this conviction to his daughter, Irene. Irene passed it to Miriam. By the time Miriam was 12, she understood that the modest house in southeast Portland where she grew up was not a reflection of what her family possessed. It was a choice, a considered, deliberate choice made by people who had decided that a quiet life was more protective than a visible one, and who had built enough legal architecture around their assets to make the protection structural rather than merely behavioral. Miriam's mother died when she was 23, pancreatic cancer. Swift and total, the kind that introduces itself and closes the matter within 8 months. Miriam sat beside her in the final weeks and absorbed, the way she had absorbed everything her mother taught her. The last set of instructions Irene Castillo gave before she stopped being able to speak. The trust documents were already in the attorney's office. The structure was already in place. Miriam's role was simply to step into it without making noise. She had been making no noise ever since. She met Marcus Webb at 22, during the 6-month window between her mother's diagnosis and her death, when Miriam was not quite herself, and the world had the unsteady quality of something that had lost its footing. He was a financial analyst at a regional investment firm, well-dressed in the way of men who understood that appearance was currency, confident in the specific way of someone who had never been told no by anyone he considered worth impressing. He was attentive at first. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. He showed up with coffee and sat beside her in hospital waiting rooms and held her hand in the parking garage and said, repeatedly and with apparent sincerity, that she did not have to manage everything alone. She believed him. She was grieving and 23, and she believed him. They married 8 months after her mother died. Small ceremony. The backyard of a friend's house in Lake Oswego. 40 people. Her grandfather watching from a lawn chair with an expression. Miriam would spend years learning to read correctly. After the wedding, Robert Castillo sat with her at the kitchen table and said one thing. A man who asks how much you make but never asks how much you carry is telling you exactly what he values. Watch which question he stops asking first. Miriam did not respond. She filed the observation. Within 3 years, she understood it completely. Marcus managed nothing in their household. Not the mortgage, which was paid from a personal account Miriam maintained from her salary and a small dividend account that was itself a fraction of her actual holdings. Not the insurance. Not the children's medical appointments or school registrations. or the 17-step administrative process of raising 2 kids in a city where everything required a form and a password and a follow-up email. Not the holiday gifts or the thank you cards or the birthday dinners for his parents that Miriam planned, organized, and executed, while Marcus arrived at the table ready to receive the credit. He was not cruel. That was the thing that made it complicated for a long time. He did not raise his voice. He did not belittle her directly. He simply occupied the life she built around him the way a tenant occupies a furnished apartment, grateful for the amenities, and curious about who arranged them, certain only that they would continue to be there. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had been having an affair for approximately 14 months before Miriam found out. She found out the way she found out most things, by paying attention to the details everyone else considered too small to notice. It was a Sunday evening. She was reviewing the shared calendar, a task she performed weekly to coordinate school pickups and dentist appointments, and the complicated logistics of 2 working parents and 2 children in middle school. There was a Thursday marked as a client dinner in Seattle. She remembered the Thursday. She remembered making dinner for the kids alone and telling them their father was traveling for work. What she did not remember, because she had not been told, was any client in Seattle. She checked the credit card statement. The charge was from a restaurant in the Pearl District, in Portland, 3 blocks from their house. She set the statement down. She poured herself a glass of water. She stood at the kitchen sink and looked at the backyard where her daughter's old swing set still stood in the corner, paint peeling, and she breathed slowly for approximately 45 seconds. Then she went back to the statement and kept reading. Over the following month, she assembled a file. She did this the way her grandfather had taught her to evaluate any situation that required a response, without emotion and without urgency, with the patience of someone who understood that evidence collected carefully was more durable than evidence collected fast. Hotel charges in 3 cities. Marcus claimed to have visited alone. Restaurant reservations for 2 on evenings he had told her he was at the office late. A contact in his phone saved under the name of a vendor their household had no business relationship with. The woman was named Cassandra. She was 31, worked in commercial real estate brokerage, and had met Marcus, Miriam eventually determined, at an industry conference 18 months earlier. She was attractive, in the particular way, of someone who had learned early that confidence was its own credential and had been operating on that principle since approximately college. Miriam learned about the relationship's seriousness from a detail so specific it briefly took her breath away. A charge on Marcus's personal card, the one she was not supposed to know the statement for but did, to a jewelry store on Northwest 23rd Avenue. The amount was substantial. The date was 4 days before their 19th wedding anniversary, which Marcus had acknowledged with the card purchased, she later determined, at the pharmacy on his lunch break. She sat in her car in the parking lot of the arts organization and held the credit card summary and felt something she had not expected. Not grief, not rage, clarity. The specific, architectural clarity of a woman whose grandfather had once told her that the most important thing about any structure was knowing exactly which walls were load-bearing before anyone else decided to start removing them. She called Robert Castillo that evening. He was 81, still sharp, still driving himself to his weekly card game, still the most methodical person she had ever known. "I know," he said, before she had finished the 3rd sentence. She went quiet. He said he had asked his property manager, a man named Theodore, who had worked for the family for 20 years and who noticed everything as a professional obligation, to run a routine review of activity connected to the family accounts. Nothing concerning on the asset side, but the behavior patterns around Marcus had shifted. "You knew. I suspected. Now you know. The question is not what happened. The question is what you do next." "What do I do?" Robert was quiet for a moment. She could hear the particular quality of a silence. The silence of a man who had spent 60 years thinking before he spoke, and had never once regretted the habit. "You do what our family has always done. You make no visible change. You let him continue to believe he understands the board, and you call Margaret." Margaret Okafor had been the Castillo family's estate attorney for 16 years. She was 57, impeccably organized, and possessed of the kind of calm that came not from temperament but from 2 decades of watching people in crisis discover that the law, properly applied, was considerably more reliable than emotion. Miriam called her the next morning. Over the following 11 months, Margaret and Robert worked quietly to reinforce the structures that the family had spent 3 generations building. Titles were reviewed. Entities were audited. The one account that had any marginal proximity to marital funds was formally separated and documented with a paper trail so clean it would require no interpretation. Every thread connecting Miriam's inherited holdings to her married life was either cleanly severed or reinforced with legal protections, thorough enough that a room full of attorneys would still be reading them a year later. Robert also instructed Theodore to watch Marcus's financial behavior. What they watched was a man growing increasingly confident. Marcus moved $41,000 from their joint savings account into a personal investment account without mentioning it. He changed the beneficiary on a life insurance policy from both of them to himself alone. He had a consultation with a family law attorney that he believed Miriam did not know about regarding the division of assets in an Oregon divorce proceeding. He was positioning, he was planning, he believed, with the unexamined certainty of a man who had spent 19 years watching a woman manage everything without acknowledgement, that she would be disoriented without him, that she would accept whatever he offered because she had always accepted whatever he provided, that the quiet wife with the modest job and the sensible car was not the kind of person who played chess. He did not know that the board had been built by her grandfather before Marcus ever learned the rules of the game. Then Robert Castillo had a stroke. Not fatal, had a stroke. Not fatal, not immediately, but significant. He spent 4 weeks in rehabilitation and 6 months navigating a recovery that was slower than his personality found acceptable. He used the time productively. He met with Margaret 3 times during those months. He transferred the remaining decision-making authorities to Miriam in a series of structured legal transactions that were completed 4 months before he died quietly in his own home on a Wednesday morning in March, Miriam beside him, her hand over his. She stayed with him until the room grew still. Then she stood. She straightened her jacket. She walked to the hallway where Margaret was waiting with her briefcase and the expression of a woman who understood that some moments required presence rather than words. "It's done," Miriam said. Margaret nodded. "Everything is in place." "He doesn't know that yet." "No, he doesn't." Miriam looked back through the doorway at her grandfather's room. She touched the thin gold ring she wore on her right hand, the one her grandfather had given her mother, and her mother had given her, engraved inside with the 3 initials of the family name. She said, "Let him come to graduation. Let him bring her. Let him think he knows what this day means." Margaret Okafor had practiced estate and asset protection law for 23 years. She had seen many things. She had never seen grief arranged with quite this degree of structural precision. And then, Miriam turned. "Then we let him find out who he's been married to." The graduation was held on a Saturday in late May, on the University Quad, the kind of perfect Pacific Northwest morning that arrives without warning and makes everyone forget the previous 8 months of rain. 400 families gathered in folding chairs beneath a pale blue sky, the scent of cut grass and someone's too strong perfume. Faculty in regalia, students in caps and gowns, nervous and luminous. Miriam arrived early. She sat in the 3rd row with her son Nathan, who was 16 and had driven with her in silence, and then, once they parked, had taken her hand for approximately 5 seconds before letting go. The way teenage boys perform affection when they think no one is calibrating the gesture. Their daughter, Claire, was graduating with a degree in environmental policy. She was 22 and serious and had her grandfather's eyes and her mother's habit of watching a room before deciding to speak in it. She did not know, yet, the full picture of what her mother had inherited or what the next several months would look like. She knew that her parents' marriage had become something to be managed rather than inhabited. She knew her mother had been quieter than usual. She had stopped asking about her father's schedule months ago, with the intuitive resignation of a child who has learned that some questions produce answers that cannot be unknitted. Marcus arrived 40 minutes into the ceremony. He was not alone. Cassandra walked beside him. She was wearing a fitted coral dress and low heels, and she moved with the particular self-possession of a woman who believed she had already won the relevant competition. Her hand was in Marcus's. She looked at the assembled families with the mild survey of someone arriving at an event she had every right to attend. Marcus found Miriam's row by scanning the crowd. Their eyes met for a moment. His expression performed something in the vicinity of acknowledgement. He guided Cassandra toward a section 3 rows back and to the left, close enough to be visible, far enough to avoid a scene he had apparently decided was beneath him. The quiet that moved through the people who knew them both was the quiet of collective recognition. Miriam watched them settle. She felt Nathan stiffen slightly beside her. She put her hand briefly on his forearm. He exhaled. She turned back to the stage. When Claire's name was called, Miriam stood. She clapped. She watched her daughter cross the stage with the composed stride of someone who had inherited the family habit of not performing for rooms. Claire found her mother's face in the crowd, and something passed between them, the specific frequency of two people who have understood each other across distance, and Miriam smiled with her whole face for the first time in longer than she could calculate. After the ceremony and the loose social period of families finding their graduates, Marcus appeared at her side. He said her name with the easy familiarity of a man who had not yet been told how the story ended. She looked at him. She looked at Cassandra, who had materialized slightly behind him, with the expression of someone prepared to be introduced. She looked back at Marcus. "Congratulations on Claire," she said. Her voice was the same voice she had used for 19 years. Level, unhurried, the voice of someone removing a name from a list. She turned to find her daughter. Marcus interpreted the composure as shock. He interpreted the absence of confrontation as paralysis. He had been interpreting her silence as weakness for 19 years, and there was no particular reason today would interrupt that pattern. It was the last significant miscalculation of his adult life. In the 3 weeks following graduation, Marcus accelerated. He moved out. He did not announce this. He began leaving things at Cassandra's apartment in incrementally larger quantities until one evening he simply did not come home, and when Miriam texted to confirm his whereabouts, he responded, "I think we've both known this was coming. Let's be adults about it." He contacted his attorney the following week. He wanted the family home. He wanted his share of whatever marital assets existed. He wanted the process to be efficient, and he wanted Miriam to cooperate, and he conveyed this through his attorney in language designed to sound reasonable, while leaving no ambiguity about who he believed held the advantage. He also did what Robert Castillo had predicted he would do. He accessed the joint investment account, the peripheral one Miriam maintained from her salary and small personal dividends, and transferred $67,000 into his personal brokerage without authorization. He did this because he believed it was marital property and therefore his to manage. He did this because he had never, in 19 years, been told no about money, and the habit of that certainty had calcified into something that looked, from the outside, a great deal like recklessness. He did not know the account was monitored. He did not know the transfer was logged in real time. He did not know that Theodore had sent a notification to Margaret Okafor within 20 minutes of the transaction clearing. Miriam watched all of it from the house that Marcus believed was jointly owned and was in fact titled to the Castillo Family Trust, in a structure established a decade before they married. She watched from the kitchen table with her morning coffee and her encrypted email updates from Margaret. She watched with the patience of a woman who had been taught by her grandfather that the most dangerous opponent in any negotiation is the one who lets you believe you are the one with leverage. She did not call Marcus. She did not respond to his attorney's emails. She did not plead or argue or appear, in any observable way, to be preparing for anything. The silence was strategic. It was the loudest thing Marcus had failed to hear for the entire length of their marriage. 3 weeks after graduation, Margaret called. He moved the $67,000. Miriam set down her coffee. Personal brokerage, no authorization. Combined with the altered beneficiary form and the undisclosed attorney consultations, we have a documented pattern of deliberate financial misconduct during the marriage. In Oregon, that materially affects equitable distribution. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning when we walk into that room, he will not be negotiating from a position of strength. He will be negotiating from a position so legally compromised that his own attorney will advise him to accept whatever we put in front of him. "Schedule it," Miriam said. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in July, in the offices of Okafor & Associates on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Portland. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette. The table was dark wood. The chairs were expensive. The silence in the room before anyone spoke had the particular weight of rooms where significant sums change hands. Marcus arrived first with his attorney, a man named Gregory Holt who specialized in high-asset divorce and who had assured Marcus repeatedly that the proceedings would be uncomplicated. Gregory Holt had a good reputation and a systematic mind. He had also, through no fault of his own, been given a completely inaccurate picture of his client's wife. He had been told, non-profit worker, $58,000 a year, minimal assets, no significant separate property. He was about to receive a correction. Miriam arrived at 9:10. Black blazer, white blouse, no jewelry except the gold ring on her right hand, her hair pulled back, her face neutral and calm in the way of someone who has already completed the relevant preparation and is now simply present for the result. Margaret O'Coffer followed her in. She was 57, silver-haired, and moved through rooms with the authority of someone who had stopped needing to establish it. She set her briefcase on the table. She did not offer pleasantries. Marcus looked at Miriam across the table with the expression of a man who believed this meeting was a formality. His posture was relaxed. His suit was his best one, the charcoal Italian wool he wore to client presentations. He had chosen it, Miriam suspected, the way men sometimes reach for armor without admitting they are afraid. Gregory Holt opened with practiced efficiency. His client sought equitable division of marital assets, including the family home, joint accounts, and any proceeds from the estate of Robert Castillo. He said the last part with particular emphasis. He said it as though it were the conclusion of an argument rather than the beginning of one. Margaret listened without expression. When he finished, she opened her briefcase and removed a folder. Before we discuss division, she said, I need to address several factual matters regarding the asset structure of this marriage. Gregory nodded. Marcus shifted slightly. Margaret opened the folder. The family residence on Sycamore Ridge Drive. Mr. Webb believes this property is jointly owned. It is not. The property is titled to the Castillo Family Trust established in 2003, 6 years before the marriage. Mr. Webb's name does not appear on the title, the deed, or any associated documentation. He has been, legally speaking, a resident without ownership interest for the duration of the marriage. The room went quiet with a specific quality of a room in which something structural has just shifted. Marcus's expression did not change immediately. It took a moment for the information to move from hearing to comprehension. The joint investment account at Fidelity. Mr. Webb transferred $67,000 from this account to his personal brokerage on May 31st without his spouse's knowledge or consent. This transfer occurred after Mr. Webb had already consulted with divorce counsel, establishing documented intent. Under Oregon law, this constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We have the transfer record, the timestamp, and the prior attorney consultation documented. Gregory Holt's pen stopped moving. He looked at Marcus with the expression of an attorney recalculating a case in real time. The life insurance policy, originally listing both parties as beneficiaries, was amended by Mr. Webb in February to designate himself as sole beneficiary. This amendment was not disclosed to Mrs. Webb. We have the original filing and the amended document. Margaret turned a page. Now, regarding the estate of Robert Castillo. She placed a second document on the table. Mr. Webb appears to be operating under the assumption that his wife received a modest personal inheritance, subject to standard equitable division rules. I need to correct that assumption. She set the document in the center of the table. Robert Castillo's estate, held in trust, consists of commercial real estate holdings across Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Colorado, a private equity portfolio, and controlling interests in 4 operating companies. The current valuation of the trust is approximately $240 million. Miriam Webb, née Castillo, holds 68% controlling interest as sole direct heir. These assets were established and titled in trust structures predating the marriage by a minimum of 6 years. Under Oregon law, separate property held in trust is not subject to equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the one before. Gregory Holt looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time. His face performed the rapid internal recalculation of a careful professional, confronting the gap between what his client told him and what was actually true. Marcus stared at Miriam, his mouth opened slightly. The confidence, the practiced ease of a man who had walked into this room certain he was the one with leverage, was draining from his face the way color drains from something exposed too long to harsh light. 200, he started. He stopped. He swallowed. His voice, when he found it, was unfamiliar to her. Smaller. He said, "You've had this entire time." Miriam looked at him. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence, which Marcus had spent 19 years reading as passivity, as compliance, as the reliable blankness of a woman who had nothing to withhold, was revealing itself now for what it had always been. The silence of someone who did not need to announce what she held because what she held did not require an audience. Margaret continued, "Given the documented pattern of financial misconduct, including the unauthorized transfer, the altered beneficiary designation, and the undisclosed legal consultations during the marriage, Mrs. Webb's legal team will be filing a counterclaim for full recovery of dissipated assets, plus applicable damages. Mr. Webb's financial exposure, conservatively estimated, exceeds $130,000. Gregory Holt set his pen down. He turned to his client. "Dominic," he caught himself. "Marcus, we need a moment." Marcus did not move. He was looking at Miriam with the searching expression of a man trying to locate something familiar in a face he believed he knew entirely. He said, quietly, "You never said anything. All those years, you just let me think." Miriam looked at him for a moment. She said, "I let you be exactly who you were, Marcus. I didn't edit you. I didn't redirect you. I watched you for 19 years make every choice you actually wanted to make. And I made sure that when you finished making them, there was nothing of mine left inside them." She paused. "You brought her to Claire's graduation. You held her hand in front of our son. You sat 3 rows behind me, and you looked comfortable doing it because you had decided I was already relevant." She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at him without anger, without performance, with the level gaze of a woman completing a task she had prepared for carefully and had no further interest in prolonging. "My grandfather spent the last year of his life making certain that when you finally showed me who you were, you would not be able to take a single thing that belonged to us." She walked to the door. Margaret gathered her documents and followed. At the threshold, Miriam paused. She did not turn around. "The house will be formally transferred to trust management by next Friday. Your belongings will be boxed and available for pickup at the address you provide to Margaret's office. The joint accounts are frozen pending resolution of the dissipation claim." She opened the door. She said, "Goodbye, Marcus." The door closed. The conference room stayed quiet. Gregory Holt looked at the trust summary on the table. Marcus looked at the closed door. The Willamette moved outside the windows, wide and indifferent. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Webb's life came apart with the impersonal efficiency of a system losing the component it was built around. The house was returned to trust management. His belongings arrived at Cassandra's apartment in 14 cardboard boxes that took up the majority of her living room and had to be moved to make the couch accessible. His firm initiated a compliance review after the divorce filing required disclosure of pending legal proceedings. The dissipation claim appeared in the required documentation. His managing director called him in for a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. He came out without his security badge. The money was frozen. The personal brokerage was placed under a temporary restraining order. The credit cards he had been using to maintain the lifestyle Cassandra had understood to be permanent began to decline at restaurants where the staff knew his name. Cassandra was 31. She had a career of her own, and a specific set of expectations about the life she was moving toward, and a very clear sense of the difference between a man with resources and a man performing the memory of having had them. She assessed the situation with the unsentimental precision of a woman who had survived on accurate information her entire adult life. She told him on a Thursday, no argument, just the quiet statement that she thought they wanted different things and that he should probably find a longer-term arrangement before the end of the month. Marcus sat in his car in her parking lot for a long time. He had no house, no position, no wife, no access to money he could move, no professional standing he could leverage, no infrastructure, no system, no foundation. He had mistaken Miriam's management of everything for evidence that she needed him to be there. He had confused her competence with dependence. He had looked at a woman who built, maintained, and arranged and sustained the entire architecture of their shared life and interpreted her labor as proof that she was the one who could not leave. He had been wrong. And the wrongness was not one mistake. It was the entire theory of the marriage, built on a premise he had never stopped to verify. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Miriam Castillo stepped into the part of her life she had been tending from a distance for 2 decades. She joined the board of the Castillo Family Foundation, her grandfather's philanthropic structure, and expanded its mission from affordable housing to include arts education, workforce development, and financial literacy programs for first-generation families. She committed $35 million over 5 years. She hired a team. She worked with the same systematic attention she had applied to managing a household. Except now the household was a foundation serving communities across 4 states. The Oregonian profiled her in the fall. The piece described her grandfather's story and her years of deliberate privacy and her decision to live at a remove from the family name until she was certain she understood what the name meant. It did not mention Marcus. It did not need to. The people who knew both of them understood the space around his absence. The foundation's annual benefit was in November. 500 guests. The ballroom of a hotel on the river. Miriam stood at the podium in a dark blue dress with her grandfather's ring on her right hand and delivered a speech about what it means to build something over generations, about the work that happens below the visible surface of any structure that holds, about the women who have always been the load-bearing walls of things that got named after someone else. She spoke for 12 minutes without raising her voice. The room was completely still. 2 months later, a photograph from that evening appeared on the Foundation's outdoor campaign. Miriam, at the podium, composed and clear, looking out over a room full of people who were finally seeing what had always been there. Marcus saw it on a Tuesday. He was walking to a meeting at a firm he had found through a contact from his earlier career, smaller than what he had known, located on a floor without a view. He was wearing a suit that fit him less well than it had 2 years ago. He was carrying a portfolio with a resume he had revised 5 times. He looked up at the image. He stood on the sidewalk and he looked at his ex-wife's face, enlarged and lit and entirely without apology. And he thought about the woman who had driven a 7-year-old Subaru and brought coffee in a scratched travel mug and sat in the same chair at the same desk and reviewed grant applications with the careful attention of someone for whom precision was a habit rather than a performance. He thought about the woman who had scheduled his parents' anniversary dinners and managed the children's orthodontist timelines, and remembered the name of every colleague he had mentioned once, and asked about them the following year. He had seen all of it. He simply had not understood what he was seeing. He had looked at a woman doing everything and concluded that she needed everything from him. He had looked at her silence and found emptiness. He had looked at her patience and found surrender. He had looked at her invisibility and found insignificance. Every conclusion was wrong. The conclusions were not errors of information. They were errors of attention. He had never paid attention to Miriam Castillo. He had paid attention to what she made possible for him, and he had accepted the product without examining the source, the way you accept that a room is warm without thinking about the system working behind the walls to keep it that way. The light changed. He crossed the street. The photograph disappeared behind him. On a Sunday morning in October, almost a year after the divorce was finalized, Miriam sat on the porch of her grandfather's house in the Columbia River Gorge. He had bought it in 1987 and used it the way her family used all significant things, without announcement, without display. It was small, wood-sided, surrounded by oak and pine, and a silence so complete it had texture. She held her coffee. The morning light came in at a low angle through the trees and moved across the porch in slow sections. Her grandfather's ring caught it and held it briefly before letting it go. Her phone was on the table beside her. On it was the encrypted folder she assembled over 2 years, credit card records, hotel charges, calendar discrepancies, every time-stamped piece of documentation that had armed her for the conference room and protected her in the proceedings that followed. She opened the folder. She scrolled through it once, slowly. The way you walk through a house you have already moved out of, checking the rooms not because you've forgotten anything, but because you want to confirm that nothing remains worth carrying. Then she selected the entire folder. She deleted it. The phone asked her to confirm. She confirmed. The screen cleared. She set the phone down on the railing and picked up her coffee and looked at the trees. A woodpecker was working somewhere to the left of the porch. The sound was rhythmic and purposeful and entirely indifferent to the human activity beneath it. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the way he had stirred his coffee at her kitchen table on the last visit he was well enough to drive himself. The specific, unhurried motion of a man who had never needed to perform urgency for anyone. She thought about what he had told her once, not as instruction, but as observation, the way he offered most things worth remembering. He said, "The people who last are the ones who know the difference between building and performing. Building is quiet. You won't always get credit for it. Do it anyway." She had not found the person her grandfather's generation would have called the right one. maybe she would. The question had become, in the past year, less urgent than it had once felt, less like a gap and more like a space she was choosing, for now, to leave open rather than fill with whatever was available. What she had found was something her grandfather had not promised her and had perhaps been waiting for her to locate on her own. She had found the specific, irreplaceable understanding that her silence had never been absence, that her patience had never been passivity, that the woman who had arranged and managed and sustained and organized and carried the invisible weight of 19 years without acknowledgement was not small for having done it. She had simply been operating at a frequency that most people are not quiet enough to detect. Marcus had not been quiet enough. His attorney had not been quiet enough. Cassandra, the firm, the social world they had moved through together, none of them had looked at Miriam Castillo closely enough to see what she was doing, because none of them had considered that what she appeared to be doing might be different from what she was actually doing. They had seen a quiet woman and assumed quiet meant empty. They had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost them in direct proportion to how certain they had been. Miriam finished her coffee. She stood. She walked inside and rinsed the mug and looked out the kitchen window at the trees, gold and green and moving slightly in a wind she couldn't feel from inside. She was not angry. Anger had served its function and been released. She was not sad. Sadness came in waves, still, and she let them arrive and recede without holding them longer than they needed to stay. She was not performing anything for anyone. She was standing in her grandfather's kitchen in the October light with his ring on her hand and 2 decades of careful, invisible work behind her, and an open horizon in front of her. And what she felt, standing there, was the thing she had not had a word for until recently. She felt the weight of her own full height. The quiet ones are not empty. They never were. They are full of everything that the loud world does not have the stillness to see. And when they finally stop shrinking to fit the space that someone else decided was the right size for them, what emerges is not a surprise. It is simply what was always there.